Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. This Georgia program throughout fall camp, for me personally, has been one of the more fun programs to kind of read the fall camp practice notes, read the scrimmage intel. There's a lot of different position battles that you're kind of seeing unfold on this Georgia roster. And what I mean by position battles, how does the rotation for a lot of these position groups for this Georgia program kind of shake out? We all know that Georgia is going to play a lot of football players in the 2024 season. That being said, who are getting the lion's share of the reps, who are emerging as the guys for this Georgia program? That's what we're trying to figure out during fall camp. Now, you see Kirby Smart get up there in front of the media and say, we are not deep enough heading into 2024. I don't think Kirby Smart would say anything different. I think you could give him 3 deep of all Americans. He'd probably still be saying during fall camp that we're not deep enough. You look at this Georgia program from a depth standpoint, there's just not many programs across the country, if any, that have the depth that Georgia has. Now, some of these names are not necessarily proven commodities in the SEC yet, but we fully expect them to be proven commodities come the middle of October. Want to get into a few of those position battles that I've been most intrigued with, kind of predict what this depth chart shakes out to be for this Georgia program. Gonna have a few hot takes in there, which would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. Before we get into it, as always, want to say thank you to you guys, the amount of support from the Georgia fans really throughout the offseason, covering the recruiting trail, covering the transfer portal, covering fall camp. It's been a blast. Y'all know I love talking this program. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, again, I'm going to have a few hot takes, a few my guys that I'm going to predict kind of emerge as dudes for this Georgia program. Would love to get some feedback from you guys in the comment section. Without further ado, let's get into this one now. Carson Beck, quarterback one, we can kind of put that one to the side. You look at this running back room, I think the biggest storyline is, all right, Trevor Etienne is going to be the bell cow of this Georgia running back room. I personally think Trevor Etienne is one of the better running backs that Georgia has had over the last couple of years, if not the best. And I've been fans of guys like Dejon Edwards and Kendall Milton. I think Trevor Etienne is special. I mean, he was really good for Florida behind a brutal offensive line in 2023. What does Trevor Etienne look like behind one of, if not the best offensive lines in 2024? But I think the big storyline here is the depth in the running back room and the stark contrast that it was 12 months ago, where we were talking about Dylan Bell moving to running back in the beginning of the season just because Georgia didn't have enough bodies. You look at this running back room and say, even a guy like Nate Frazier, as a true freshman, sounds like he's going to contribute in the running back room for this Georgia program. Now we're saying, all right, we got a top-end guy in Trevor Etienne behind an elite offensive line with just a stable of running backs. This rushing attack for Georgia is going to be really fun to watch. Now, I think the most fascinating conversation within this Georgia program on the offensive side of the football, how does the pass catcher room shake out for Georgia? Now, what I'll say here is I do think Georgia is going to continue to play a lot of 2 tight end sets, which means only 2 wide receivers will be on the football field for Georgia. I wouldn't say a majority of the plays, but a good portion of the plays. And so your 2 wide receivers in those 2 wide receiver sets, I don't think it's a question, is Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett. I think one of the fascinating storylines coming out of Georgia's fall camp is the emergence of Arian Smith, a guy that it seems like for the last 3 years we've been excited for, but hasn't necessarily lived up to the consistency that we wanted to see. If we get a healthy Arian Smith that's consistently on the football field for Georgia, he injects that element of explosiveness that Georgia might have lacked last year. Now, kind of predicting how the wide receiver room shakes out. Again, Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell are the 2 proven commodities in the SEC heading into 2024. I expect them to be probably the 2 leading receivers for this Georgia program. You sprinkle in Arian Smith. My eyeballs continue to be on Colby Young, who, again, I think might be the most gifted wide receiver in this room, gives that Georgia program a real X. I loved him at Miami last year. This is a kid that's always generated a lot of buzz, has never always put it on the field consistently. That's the storyline for Colby Young. And I don't know if he'll be a week 1 starter for Georgia. I think the big storyline for Georgia fans to kind of follow through the season is, can we get Colby Young on the field more consistently so when we get to the college football playoffs, Colby Young has emerged as that true X wide receiver in this Georgia offense? Because if that's the case, that is kind of the what I'd say maybe the missing piece within this Georgia wide receiver room is that true big-bodied X wide receiver. Colby Young has all the traits to be that guy. And so over the first couple of weeks of this Georgia season in 2024, can he emerge as that guy? That's the number one storyline that I'm looking for in the pass catcher room. You look at the tight end spot, Oscar Delp, dude. Benjamin Urasek, a guy that I think Georgia fans are starting to kind of come around to, kind of committed to Georgia in a weird time in the transfer portal, wasn't enrolled for the spring. I think he's kind of flying under the radar. I think he's been one of the best tight ends in the country over the last couple of years, just kind of rotting away on the Stanford offense. He comes to a Georgia offense where he's going to be a focal point of this offense. I think Benjamin Urasek might be one of those real surprise players, not only in the SEC, but nationally for Georgia in 2024. I think there are a lot of casual fans that look at the tight end room and say, all right, you maybe have Oscar Delp, but you lose Brock Bowers. How do you replace that kind of guy? You don't just replace Brock Bowers. You got two really good tight ends. You could probably throw Lawson Lucky into that conversation as well, who I still think are difference makers for Georgia at the tight end room. The offensive line, we kind of talked about it. The real benefit that Georgia has on the offensive line, they have a guy sitting there on the inside of Micah Morse. I think he's a top 5 interior offensive lineman in the SEC, and he just happens to be behind two of the better ones. Now, with Jared Wilson dealing with what I think is Achilles tendonitis, Tate Ratledge kicks into center, which we have full confidence that Tate Ratledge can do that, and he's been taking reps since spring. And then you just have the ability, the privilege to trot out Micah Morse at a guard spot where you get, I don't think, really any drop-off in terms of Tate Ratledge kicking to center, Micah Morse. I think Micah Morse is a dude. And so you look at the offensive line, even with your starting center sitting out during fall camp with some Achilles tendonitis problems, this offensive line doesn't skip a beat on the inside of the offensive line. Then you look at the tackle spot, it's at least in my opinion, a similar situation where you have Ernest Green, you have Xavier Truss. You also have a guy in Monroe Freeling who is going to play a lot of football for Georgia in 2024. And although he might not be better than some guys in Ernest Green and Xavier Truss who've played a lot of football, Monroe Freeling is more than serviceable at the tackle spot. In an era where so many teams are looking for just 2 starting tackles, I think Georgia has 3 of them that they feel really good about. So you get Kirby Smart not complaining, but kind of calling out his program's depth. I look at it and say, this is a team that is extremely deep, especially at the spots where you got to be deep on the offensive line. Going to the defensive side of the football, there are some intriguing, and again, I'm going to use the word position battles. I am more intrigued with what the rotation kind of looks like, and I'm going to go to that jack linebacker spot where you'll see a lot of different faces playing that jack spot, right? Chaz Chambliss, hammer against the run. He's not as gifted as a guy like Damon Wilson or a guy like Jalen Walker in terms of getting after the passer, but we kind of had this conversation the other day. If Chaz Chambliss gives you the best ability to stop the run on first and second down, play Chaz Chambliss. And then when it comes time to pin your ears back and get after the quarterback on 3rd and long, that's when you're looking at Damon Wilson. That's when you're looking at Jalen Walker to be those edge rushers that are going into year 2, year 3, respectively, to kind of take that step and be elite pass rushers for this Georgia defense. And if you get that with Mikael Williams on the other side, that's going to be a pass rush that is going to be freaky. Now, one of the guys that I'm kind of keeping my eyes on, especially with the Jordan Hall injury news, Xavier McLeod coming from South Carolina. Again, that was a under-the-radar transfer portal addition where Georgia didn't have that many question marks on the inside of the defensive line with Stackhouse, Brinson coming back, Jordan Hall, Jamal Jarrett, Christian Miller. Xavier McLeod's a very, very big body, and I think he's very gifted coming out of that 2023 class. He redshirted at South Carolina, kind of left the program in a weird – whatever happened there was kind of funky. Xavier McLeod can provide that depth that maybe you are all of a sudden lacking with Jordan Hall sitting out with an injury. I look at the inside of the defensive line and say, I'm not too worried about what the inside of the defensive line looks like. Linebackers, certainly not a problem with guys like C.J. Allen, Munden, and Raylan Wilson. You look at the secondary, I think you got 2 to 3 bona fide starters who aren't really going to leave the football field. That's obviously Malachi Starks at safety, Dalen Everett at cornerback. And I do think Jonel Aguero is going to be that star. It sounds like he's really settled into that position. I think the other 2 positions that you're probably keeping an eye on is that other boundary cornerback spot in the free safety spot, where you have Dan Jackson, who can play at a very high level in the SEC, and then you have a true freshman in KJ Bolden, who sounds to be special. That's another one of those positions that I don't really know if it necessarily matters who starts week one. I think your eyeballs are on, all right, how does KJ Bolden continue to progress over the first 8 weeks of the season? Because if you're talking about what does Georgia's defense look like at its peak, it's probably KJ Bolden back there as they roll into the college football playoffs, being an absolute ball hawk in the back end, because we know he can do that coming out of Buford. Then the boundary cornerback position, I think you got another special kid in Ellis Robinson. And so again, Georgia's in a spot where we don't have to thrust these true freshmen into the fire if they're not ready. That being said, you're going to continue to get their feet wet, continue to get work for them, and then come week 8, week 10, week 9, rolling into the SEC championship game in the college football playoffs, are Ellis Robinson and KJ Bolden ready to be dudes for this Georgia defense. That's kind of what I'm looking at. But everything you're hearing out of fall camp is Ellis Robinson, KJ Bolden. They're going to be guys that play for this Georgia program. How much of an impact do they have? That probably depends on the first 8 weeks of the season. I look at Georgia and say, all right, Kirby Smart, of course, he's going to call out his team, kind of light a little fire under them. I look at the depth and say, all right, if you're the biggest maybe hole in your depth is at the safety position, where you have, I think, the best safety in the country, Malachi Starks, and then your third safety off the bench. They're not off the bench, but your first safety off the bench, your third safety in this defense is a 5-star safety in KJ Bolden. That's first world problems for Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs. I think there are a lot of programs across the country that would die for that kind of situation. If that's your biggest concern in terms of depth, Kirby Smart, I think you're in a good spot, dude. But that being said, we don't expect anything less from Kirby Smart in terms of trying to develop that depth and kind of keep that fire under his players' butts throughout fall camp going into 2024. That's how Kirby Smart's had success as a coach. He's going to continue to do it that way. Wanted to give you guys some of my thoughts and some of the more, at least in my opinion, intriguing position battles, rotation battles heading into 2024. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. Again, appreciate y'all rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.